Imagine working at a job for 17 years, giving it your all, sacrificing weekends, missing family events, and putting in those late night hours. You've climbed the ranks, built a solid reputation, and everything seems secure. Your colleagues respect you, your boss acknowledges your dedication, and you feel like you found a place where you truly belong. Then, one morning, everything changes. Your boss calls you into their office, and as you walk in, you're thinking about your to-do list or maybe a new project that needs your attention. But instead, you're hit with something that makes your heart stop. You're fired. No warning, no explanation. Just a simple, cold statement. You're done here. In that moment, it's like the ground has been ripped from beneath your feet, and you're left staring at a future that suddenly feels uncertain. It was exactly what happened to me. After 17 years of hard work, dedication, and loyalty, I found myself out the door. At first, all I could feel was shock. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. But as confused and hurt as I was, there was something inside me that said this wasn't just random. This wasn't just a bad day. I knew something my boss didn't. Something I had been watching unfold without even realizing it at the time. It wasn't just about the firing itself, it was about what I had seen, what I had picked up on, and how, in the end, I wasn't as blind to the situation as they thought I was. For 17 years, I gave everything to that company. I started when I was young and eager, fresh out of college. I had dreams, goals, and a lot of ambition. At first, it was about learning everything I could, proving myself, and making a name for myself. As the years went by, I took on more responsibility, worked harder, and made sure to go above and beyond. I thought that's what you had to do to get ahead, to show you were irreplaceable. The promotions came, the pay raises followed, and I thought, this is it. This is the life I've built. I thought I was secure. I thought I had earned my place in that company, that my years of service, my loyalty, and my contributions meant something. But then that morning came, and suddenly none of it mattered. No one told me that things were changing. No one gave me a heads up that what I thought was a stable, reliable job might not be as secure as I had believed. I had no idea that the very company I had invested so much of myself into was about to discard me without so much as a second thought. At the time, I didn't understand why this was happening. It felt like a betrayal. But looking back now, I can see the pieces of the puzzle I missed, the little signs I should have noticed, the changes that were happening right under my nose. There were whispers in the hallways, quiet conversations in the break room, and shifts in the office culture that I didn't pay attention to because I was too caught up in my own work, too focused on what I was doing to notice the bigger picture. You see, the company wasn't the same as it used to be. The environment had shifted. The people at the top were making decisions about layoffs, restructuring, and cost-cutting, decisions I had no part in, decisions that left me and many others in the dark. I had been so focused on my own growth and the work in front of me that I didn't notice the subtle shift in priorities, the move toward profitability over people. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the bottom line. But here's the thing. I wasn't as clueless as I seemed. I had started to pick up on certain things, small changes in the way management communicated, the subtle hints that something was brewing behind closed doors. I started seeing the patterns, the way people were being let go without explanation, and how the company was trying to save money by cutting corners. I didn't have all the details, but I knew enough to understand that I wasn't immune to the changes. When I walked into that office that morning, I thought I was just going to have another routine conversation with my boss. Instead, I was blindsided with the news that I was being let go. No explanation, no warning, just a simple, matter-of-fact delivery. It was crushing. But here's the twist, I knew something my boss didn't. I knew what was really happening, and I wasn't as surprised as they thought I was. The firing wasn't random, and it wasn't personal. It was part of something bigger, something I had been noticing for a while. At that moment, I didn't just feel anger or betrayal, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had been preparing for something like this, even if I didn't fully realize it at the time. I had seen the signs, and though I couldn't stop it from happening, I wasn't completely blindsided. I knew something they didn't, and that knowledge would be the key to what happened next. After the shock of being fired wore off, a rush of emotions hit me all at once: anger, betrayal, confusion. How could this happen? I had worked for 17 years, dedicated myself completely to this company. It didn't make sense. It felt like everything I had worked for had been wiped away in a single moment. But as much as I was hurt, a part of me already knew why it happened. I knew there were things at play that my boss hadn't considered. I walked out of that office in a daze, my head spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. But as I replayed the conversation in my mind, something clicked. There were whispers and rumors I had been hearing for months, small comments, offhand remarks from colleagues, subtle signs that pointed to what had really been going on. The company's financial struggles, the constant reshuffling of employees, and the increasing focus on cost-cutting measures. It was all coming together now. I wasn't just another employee to be let go. I was a part of a bigger plan. But there was one thing they didn't realize: they had underestimated me. I had been paying attention, and I had seen enough to know that I wasn't completely in the dark. For weeks leading up to my firing, I had felt the tension in the air. Changes were happening within the company, and I could sense that things weren't quite right. New managers came in, teams were being restructured, and people were being moved around. It wasn't just a change in workflow, it was a shift in priorities. I noticed that the focus was no longer on the people who had built the company, like me. It was about streamlining operations, cutting costs, and pushing the bottom line. I had heard chatter about layoffs and seen a few colleagues quietly leave without any explanation. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself, I'm safe. I'm essential. They can't just get rid of me. But in the end, the writing was on the wall. My boss had made the decision, and I was just another casualty of the company's new direction. But here's the part that will blow your mind: I wasn't totally caught off guard. I had been paying close attention to the way things were changing, and I knew something they didn't. A couple of weeks before the firing, I overheard a conversation in the break room between a couple of senior managers. They were talking about cutting the fat and getting rid of excess personnel. They didn't mention names, but it was clear they were planning to reduce the workforce, and my name was at the top of the list. I had a feeling something was coming, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly. In that moment, when my boss sat me down and said I was being let go, I knew exactly what was going on. I wasn't just an employee. They were making a strategic decision that had nothing to do with my performance or dedication. They were doing what they thought was necessary for the company's survival. But I had one advantage: I had been paying attention, and I was ready. I wasn't about to be taken by surprise. I didn't show it in that moment, but in my mind I was already preparing for what came next. I knew this firing wasn't the end for me. In fact, it felt like the beginning of something new. But as I left that office, I couldn't help but think about how many people in that company didn't see the bigger picture. How many of them were just blindly following the changes without understanding what was really happening. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was about understanding the game that was being played and realizing that I wasn't as powerless as I had thought. I had the knowledge, the experience, and the awareness to turn this situation around. And while my boss thought they were in control, I had a few tricks up my sleeve that they didn't see coming. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't just my firing that made me rethink everything. It was the signs that led up to it. The late-night meetings that always seemed to end with a sense of urgency, the sudden changes in office dynamics, and the quiet restructuring of teams. I had been too focused on my own work, my own success, to realize that the company I had worked for wasn't the same anymore. But I was starting to see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about me, and it wasn't even about the company's leadership. It was about the direction the entire business world was heading, towards cost-cutting, restructuring, and making tough decisions in the name of survival. I had always been proud of my dedication to the company, but now I realized that I was just a cog in a much larger machine. It's a tough pill to swallow when you've dedicated so many years to something, and it all seems to disappear in an instant. But I started to understand that sometimes these things happen for a reason, and as painful as it was, I could see now that it was pushing me in a new direction. A direction I wasn't prepared for, but a direction that would change everything. After that shocking firing, I had time to reflect. As much as I felt betrayed, I realized that the company's decision was part of a larger shift in the corporate world, one that I hadn't fully grasped before. It was no longer about loyalty or hard work. It was about survival, cutting costs, and focusing on profits. But what I also realized was that I wasn't completely powerless. I had knowledge that had been building over time, which would ultimately help me move forward. The truth was, I had been paying attention to the little details that no one else seemed to notice. At first I thought they were just coincidences, things that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But looking back, I can see that all those seemingly insignificant changes were part of a bigger picture. The company was evolving, and so was the way they viewed their employees. My firing wasn't personal. It was part of the company's strategy to restructure, to reduce its workforce, and to focus on a more efficient operation. And I had become a casualty of that plan. One of the things that clued me into what was really happening was the sudden increase in layoffs. At first it seemed like random decisions, but as I began to notice the patterns, I realized that it wasn't random at all. People were being let go based on a simple formula: how much they cost versus how much they contributed. It wasn't about experience, loyalty, or performance. It was about whether or not you were viewed as essential in terms of the company's bottom line. The more I watched, the more I saw that they weren't firing people based on who had done the most work, but on who was costing them the most money. And then there was the restructuring. New faces were popping up, people I had never seen before, walking around with authority. It wasn't just a few changes here and there, it was a complete overhaul. The company's direction was shifting, and I could feel the tension in the air. I had seen the old way of doing things, the way I had always known it, and now everything was being turned upside down. But I also realized something else. Something more important. I was a part of that company for a reason. I was there for 17 years because I had something to offer, something no one else could. My experience, my insight, and my knowledge were valuable. Even though I had been let go, that didn't mean I was worthless. It meant I had to find a new way to use what I had learned. I spent the next few days thinking about everything, the way the company had changed, the way I had changed, and what I had learned throughout the years. I realized that this firing wasn't the end of my journey, it was just a new beginning. Sure, I was out of a job, but that didn't mean I was out of options. In fact, I had more opportunities than I realized. The biggest lesson I took from all of this was that things change. Life changes. Companies change. And sometimes, when you're too focused on one thing, you miss the signs that things are moving in a different direction. The world doesn't wait for anyone, and neither does the business world. What I knew, however, was that my knowledge, what I had learned during my time at that company, wasn't something I could just throw away. It was something that would carry me forward, but there was also a deeper truth in all of this, something that many people miss. When you're fired, it's easy to feel like you've failed, like you've somehow let yourself down. It's easy to think that you're not good enough, that you're just another casualty of a system that doesn't care. But I started to see things differently. This wasn't a failure. It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to move forward, to do something different, to take control of my own future. And while the company may have thought they were getting rid of me, they didn't realize that they had just opened the door for something much bigger. Something I would take full advantage of. The next part of this story is something I'll never forget. After being fired, I didn't just walk away quietly. I wasn't going to let this happen without confronting the situation. I had been loyal for 17 years. I deserved an explanation, a conversation, something more than the cold, emotionless dismissal I had received. So I went back to the office a few days later, not as an employee, but as someone who needed answers. I walked into that office with a sense of purpose. My boss wasn't expecting me to return. And when I sat down in front of them, I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They knew what was coming. I asked them directly, why me? Why now? I wanted to understand the reasoning behind the firing, the decision to let me go after everything I had given to the company. I wasn't angry, I was calm, determined to get the answers I deserved. I pressed them on the company's direction, the layoffs, the restructuring. I asked if my firing had anything to do with the shifts happening within the company, with the new focus on cost-cutting and efficiency. And as I sat there, listening to their half-hearted answers, I realized something that hit me hard. They didn't have a good answer. They didn't have a reason that made sense. At that moment, I knew that I wasn't just being fired for performance reasons. This was part of something bigger, a decision made by people who were looking at the bottom line and cutting anyone who didn't fit into their new vision. I had become collateral damage in their quest for efficiency. But as I walked out of that office, something changed inside me. I wasn't defeated. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready to move on, ready to take the lessons I had learned and use them to create something bigger and better for myself. And I realized one final thing that day: sometimes you have to lose everything to truly see your potential. And that's exactly what happened to me. After the confrontation, things didn't immediately feel better. I walked away from the office that day with a mix of emotions: relief, confusion, and even a little bit of disbelief. Here I was, fired after nearly 2 decades, but there was something deeper in me telling me that this wasn't the end. It was a hard pill to swallow. All I had known for 17 years was tied to that job, that company. I had built my life around it, and now, in a blink, it was gone. But as the days passed, I started to think differently. I realized that I didn't need that job. I didn't need that company to validate me or define my worth. Sure, it had been a part of my life for so long, but it wasn't the only part. I had skills, experience, and knowledge that I had gathered over the years, valuable things that didn't end just because I was no longer an employee. I had the ability to reinvent myself, and that realization was the first spark of hope I had since the firing. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when doubt crept in. I questioned myself, what now? What was I going to do? I had never imagined being without a job, without that familiar structure in my life. But as I continued reflecting, I started to see that the firing wasn't just a setback, it was a wake-up call. It was a chance for me to finally take control of my future, to stop relying on someone else to determine my path. I made a decision that day, not to let this define me, but to use it as fuel. I began to map out my next steps. The first thing I did was reach out to people I had worked with over the years. People who respected me, people who knew my worth. I started networking, building connections, and talking to former colleagues who had moved on to other companies or started their own businesses. I had learned so much in those 17 years, and I realized that I could take that knowledge and apply it in new ways. I had been managing teams, overseeing projects, and making decisions for so long, yet I had always been constrained within the company's walls. Now those walls were gone, and the possibilities were endless. One of the first things I did was update my resume, but instead of just listing my job history, I focused on the skills and achievements that truly set me apart. I didn't just want another job, I wanted something better. Something that valued my experience, my insights, and my leadership. I was determined to find a place where I wasn't just a cog in a machine, but a vital part of the team, where I could contribute in a meaningful way. And as I started putting myself out there, I was amazed by the response. People respected the work I had done, and they were willing to give me opportunities. I wasn't just an ex-employee, I was someone with valuable experience. It wasn't long before I had multiple offers on the table, and I realized something crucial. I had more power than I thought. The first offer that came in was from a startup company looking for someone with my skill set. They needed leadership, someone who could take the reins and help guide them through the early stages of growth. I was hesitant at first, unsure about diving into something so uncertain, but I knew deep down that this was my chance. It was a chance to do something fresh, something that excited me, something that could finally align with my personal values. The second offer came from a consultancy firm. They were impressed with my long tenure at the company and the breadth of my experience. They offered me a role that allowed me to use my knowledge to help other businesses avoid the same mistakes I had witnessed. I started to see that, even though my former job was gone, I could take what I had learned and turn it into something even bigger. But it wasn't just about getting a new job. It was about regaining control over my life and career. The firing had been a wake-up call, but it was also an opportunity. I wasn't going to let the company's decision to let me go be the defining moment of my life. Instead, I was going to make it the moment that propelled me into something bigger and better. Looking back now, I can honestly say that being fired was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to look at my life from a new perspective, to see all the things I had been overlooking. It pushed me to make changes I had been too afraid to make on my own. I started my own consulting business, using my expertise to help other companies navigate through the very things I had been through. I started to work with leaders who respected me, who valued my experience, and who wanted to learn from my successes and my mistakes. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was the one making decisions, leading others, and creating change. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself. But in the end, I realized that the firing wasn't a failure, it was a gift. It was a chance to step into my own power, to define my future, and to live a life that was entirely my own. And that's the message I want to leave with you today. No matter how bad things get, no matter how many setbacks you face, there's always a way forward. Sometimes life forces you to take a hard look at where you are and where you're headed. And when that happens, don't fight it. Embrace it, because you never know, it might just be the thing that pushes you toward your true purpose. I hope this story resonated with you, and if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, know that you're not alone. Sometimes, being let go is just the beginning of something better. Don't let one setback define your entire journey. You have the power to create the life you want, just like I did. If you've ever been fired or gone through a tough situation at work, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below and share your experience. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Remember, the future is yours to shape. Take control.